So you don't feel able to get an erection. What is happening?
Aisha Paris-Smith is a certified somatic sexologist.
How is it for you to be there receiving sex that you don't enjoy?
Aisha helps individuals embrace their bodies, desires, and untapped potential.
The use of touch to generate pleasure, only a sexological body worker is legally allowed to do.
She recently appeared on Channel 4 series Virgin Island.
So noticing what your body wants to take off next.
The reality show features a group of virgins exploring intimacy and relationships while living together on an island retreat.
Some clients, they arrive, they immediately want to take off their clothes and have body work. Other clients, it's terrifying for them to show up.
Aisha was nominated for Sexological Bodyworker of the Year 2025. Her work has been featured by the Sunday Times and her private retreats in the Financial Times.
You've watched a porn video about, I fancy my stepdaughter or my stepmom, whatever, which is very big right now on porn sites. After you finished, you're just like horrified. Why did I watch that video? Why did that video turn me on?
It's so good to have you here, Aisha. And we have so many questions because, as I told you earlier, before Virgin Island, I didn't even know there's such a thing as a sexologist. I thought people just go to a therapist and talk about, their intimacy issues. So let's just start with the obvious question for people who don't know what a somatic sex therapy means.
Yes, okay. Somatic sexology is a body-based approach and body-centered in all ways to getting your sexual issues resolved. A lot of people come to me with chronic long-term sexual issues, but it also can be relational dynamics. So not an individual, but a couple who want to come and take care of their sex life, really wake their passion and their liveness up maybe after a year or 10 years or 20 years. And then I also have individuals who come because they simply don't feel that they got adequate sex education and they just feel like sex could be better. So there is a therapeutic aspect to it, but we tend to focus it more as a coaching modality than as traditional therapy.
I'm understanding that it's not people talking to you only about the issues. Obviously, they will talk to you, but how do you help them then if it's not like a traditional therapy?
So therapy is a dynamic that happens between a patient and a therapist or a counselor. And people tend to spend a long time in therapy, and it doesn't really go beyond talking about the past and talking about the present. In coaching, we're focused on the future. We're looking at where do you want to get to and how do we get you there in the simplest and most effective way. I love coaching too because I'm on an equal level with my client. They're not a patient. I don't think anything is wrong with them. I don't think that their body is broken. I'm not arriving with a client who says, I'm not able to get an erection and defining them as someone who has erectile dysfunction. No. Instead, I'm interested. Okay, so you don't feel able to get an erection. What is happening? What is your body doing? When do you get some level of erection? And when was the last time that you had one? And we go on this curious exploration of understanding from a positive point of view and from an empowering point of view, what is going on with their body. They also get to choose, because this is a client-centered journey, how we go about what we do. They get to choose, do they want to talk about things and have coaching and not have any touch or anything else happen? Do they want to have body work, but the body work be whilst they're fully clothed? Do they want to have body work and be undressed? Do they want to have body work but touch themselves and not have anyone else touch them or see their body? Or do they want that someone like me is wearing gloves and supporting them and touching them and showing them just like an adult sex educator?
Interesting. So you almost answered my next question, Aisha.
Okay.
But I still have a little details that I want to ask. In terms of the body work, what does that look like? What would people expect if they came to someone like you?
If you're going to a typical somatic sexologist who is also trained in sexological bodywork, they will start to maybe do a somatic assessment, so to work out where you're at with your body, how well you can feel your body and name the things that are going on inside of you. How well, and this is fundamental, can you name what you want? A lot of people, they don't know what they want.
I can imagine.
And if they do know what they want, they feel shame.
Yes.
And so they either try and hide it from themselves or they don't dare speak about it. But when we don't speak about the things that we want, then we can't have the life that we most desire.
That is true, but I can imagine not being, easy for people to come to someone and just open all their sexual fantasies, right? It's probably a work in progress for you.
Which is why it's the first step of any session,
Okay.
is that the sexologist, once they've assessed where you're at, then they support you to connect with and express what you want. Because as a coach, I'm there to get you from A to B. But if you can't tell me that B is where you want to get to, if you feel you have to tell me about this other thing where your partner wants you to get to or where society says you should be, then we might move from where you are now to that place that you asked to get to, but you don't feel fulfilled at the end. So as a great coach, I need to make sure that you truly are telling me what you want. Then we co-create what happens next. So let's just make something up. Let's say you're like the client that I spoke with last night and you'd like to have your first orgasm. Okay? So you know much more about your body and the situation than I do. So I'd start by hearing about what happens when you try to orgasm. And say you don't feel a lot of pleasure in your body, just generally, you don't know what your body likes. Well, then we'd work out, what is the first step? The first step is to support you to work out how your body likes to be touched. And if you're even more like you haven't ever touched your genitals before, then maybe we'd do some sex education about the different parts of your genitals. But the point is we co-create it. Mm-hmm. And this is fundamental because some clients, they arrive and they immediately want to take off their clothes and have body work, And other clients, it's terrifying for them to show up. We sit in separate chairs, maybe quite far away from each other, and they just want to get to know me for a whole session before we talk about anything related to that. Once we've co-created what we're going to do in the session, we set time agreements. So say we were going to do body work. I ask you, would you like to do this for 10 minutes, for an hour? So you can choose, what is my willingness? How much time do I want to spend in this? May I also add that the use of touch to generate pleasure is something that only a sexological body worker is legally allowed to do. If you go to see a pelvic floor therapist, they're not allowed to generate pleasure through their touch. If you go to see your gynecologist, it's the same. So someone who has an issue that requires around pleasure and that needs help, the somatic sexologist who has a sexological bodywork training is the only person they can legally go to get that issue resolved. And as well as, and it's not legal in many places. We're lucky to be in the UK where it's legal. It's legal as well in Switzerland. Like most of the states in the US, it's not legal. And most of the places around the world, it's not legal.
So we talked about safety of the clients, right?
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I mean, you were describing how some clients come in and they want to immediately get naked, right? Yeah. How do you protect yourself?
Thank you for asking that question. Yeah. When I went through my training, I was preoccupied with this question. And I didn't really feel like I got a lot of answers from my teachers, which I was very annoyed about. And then I started the work. And when I started the work and I met my clients, I realized that they're being so vulnerable with me that there isn't any malicious intent that we would immediately imagine with the idea of a woman offering, I'm gonna gender this, a woman offering a man bodywork, being alone with a man who's naked, who's going into his arousal. So I realized very quickly that if someone did have malicious intent, they wouldn't come to see me. That's where sex workers are much more at risk because if you go to see a sex worker, you don't have to fill in 4 pages of forms before you arrive, telling them about all your sexual history and your desires and the problems that you're having in this area of your life. If you're going to see, or if it's someone with malicious intent, they aren't going to want to share their personal information. They're not going to want to pay. So I realized very quickly that no, in this situation, I am safe.
How did you end up becoming a somatic sex coach?
So when I used to work for the food industry, for organic food. I was always about healthy bodies and minds and also healthy planet. And I was being sexually harassed by my boss. And my good friend convinced me to leave the company and to follow her. She was going on a trip to Asia. So I followed her, led to me traveling around Asia, ending up in a tantric community completely accidentally, and meeting someone who initiated me into tantric sex.
What is that?
Tantric sex is a form of yogic tradition that invites people to see sex as something that's divine and sacred, and to use it as a pathway to enlightenment. So it's a spiritual practice, essentially, and it's characterized by slow sex, the use of breath work, and transfiguration, which is where you see your partner as like a divine presence, and you sublimate, which means that you learn how to transport the sexual energy from your pelvis and your genitals up into your mind and like into the universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the time, not because of the sexual harassment, but just out of other things that had happened in my childhood. I had chronic depression. I had a terrible, very long eating disorder. And I had a lot of social anxiety. And I hated my body. Can't believe it. I hated my body. I thought my body was the biggest burden in my life. I thought my body hated me. But through these experiences where I really got to enjoy my body and I really got to express my body and I really got in touch with my body, I built a whole new relationship with her and a whole new relationship with pleasure and sex. And I realized that where trauma dysregulates our system and messes us up, pleasure regulates and heals us. That has been my personal experience. But I didn't go and become a tantric practitioner because in the tantric scene, there's a lot of sexual abuse. People use the spiritual teachings to coerce others and manipulate others and justify behaving very badly.
I did imagine that. So, Aisha, what is a sexual trauma?
Ooh, great question. We talk about sexual trauma so much, but how many of us really understand what that is? So a sexual trauma is less about what happened and more about how our body and our mind and our nervous system experienced and then stored what happened for us in a sexual situation.
So how would I understand it's not going to be always the same, but if you were to describe it as a therapist, how would sexual trauma look to you in a client?
They aren't usually very trusting of me. They have a lot of fear about going into the process of coming and doing this work. And in their body, when they approach sex, well, first of all, they usually have a lot of disconnection with their body. And then they often have a distrust or a lot of negativity towards this concept of sexual pleasure. They may feel shut down. Their body freezes. They're not able to speak. They have a lot of tension in their pelvis around sexual situations or when someone's coming towards them with a sexual intention. They also might have, if they do remember an experience and they know a particular experience happened to them, they may have recurrent memories coming back to them that make them very uncomfortable as they move through their life.
And how would somatic sex therapy help people who suffer sexual trauma?
the body is the physical manifestation of our subconscious mind. And with sex in society, we've been told it's bad, don't talk about it, sex is taboo. And so we've actually had to compartmentalize and then shut away these aspects of ourselves. If we've also had sexual trauma, that happens to an even greater degree. And often around sexual trauma, people have this feeling that they were involved and they did something wrong. So by centering the body in somatic sex coaching and by going very slowly, we allow people who have experienced trauma to get back in touch with their sexuality without overwhelming their system, and in a way that they direct it. So they learn how to self-protect and then advocate for what they want, and then embrace and express themselves sexually. Arousal is an altered state. For me, arousal, like people get drunk on arousal. Have you ever noticed that?
No.
Yeah, so actually, I believe it's the reason for a lot of sexual assaults, that especially the more minor ones, is that people are so aroused, but they don't know how to handle their arousal. And so it leads them to an altered state of consciousness. It takes over them.
Okay.
And this is part also, I believe, as a result of society making sex to be so taboo. A woman called Katie Sara describes really well. She's head of a somatic sexology school called the Institute of Relational Harmony Studies, along with amazing woman called Phoebe. And Katie talks about how when we've not been allowed to be conscious of sexuality because of how society has told us it's bad, and it's bad to let that part of us lead, our sexuality, it gets pushed away, right? But it becomes a shadow, something lurking behind us rather than something out in the open in front of us. And it's very powerful. Have you noticed how powerful sex is?
Yes.
And so it can get into the driver's seat of the car. It can go from being pushed into the back, now with the steering wheel, but because we haven't let ourselves be conscious of it, it's taking us places and doing things that we can't, after we come out of the situation, we're like, how did that happen? And this experience of not identifying or not feeling good about how we showed up sexually after the arousal and the orgasm has played itself out can often be referred to as post-nut clarity. And it's where you wake up after a sexual experience and go, oh my goodness, why did I have sex with that person? Or after self-pleasuring to videos that you actually abhor on an ethical level, or you've watched a porn video about a situation of incest, this step, I fancy my stepdaughter or my stepmom, whatever, which is very big right now on porn sites. And then after you finish, you're just like horrified. Why? And you feel shame. Why did I watch that video? Why did that video turn me on? And so it's when we aren't conscious of our arousal and it gets pushed into our shadow, we're unconscious of it, it leads us to having a lot of shame around who we are sexually. And actually that's also very, very common as a symptom of sexual trauma. And I would actually say that when we can self-inflict harm and sexual abuse onto ourselves when we act out things that don't feel in alignment with who we want to be, what we feel is good, and our sexual ethics.
That's interesting. Causing sexual harm to ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the same way that someone would overeat,
Yes, I know what you're saying.
Like they go into this food kind of hypnosis and they eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And
they don't feel good afterwards.
They don't feel good after. Right.
But it's still the way.
Right. And if you imagine someone who is withholding from themselves, sugar is bad, mustn't have sugar ever. And then they taste a little bit of sugar, or they get all these adverts everywhere about food, and suddenly they have a little bit and they can't stop themselves, and they need more and more and more because they don't know when they're going to let themselves have any of it again. And of course, sex, just like food, these are fundamental parts of our human experience. The human race won't exist without people having sex, and the body won't exist unless it can be nourished with food. And I also believe sex is a nourishment that we need for our mental health. So our bodies will find a way if we withhold from ourselves these experiences that are so formative and important for being human.
So Aisha, as a somatic sex therapist, what is your idea on how is porn, and I would say the explosion of porn in the society and OnlyFans, affecting people's sexual lives, especially the younger generations where this might be their first encounter with sex?
Yeah, so it's having a really big impact, but I also want to say that I don't feel, especially ethical porn, is in itself good or bad. Ethical porn being pornography that's made, that pays people well, that there's no trafficking involved, et cetera, et cetera. But because we're seeing pornography really arriving into the playgrounds in the UK, there are children as young as 7 who have been showed porn in the playgrounds, and it's becoming actually much more common, which is just balmy. No parent is thinking about needing to explain what porn is to a child.
Absolutely.
So that is their first experience, their first demonstration of porn or intimacy between 2 consenting adults. And it really frames how they develop sexually and how they view the idea of sex and touch. And it is actually quite harmful for a lot of these young children because they don't have any other examples of what sex is. No one's helping them to see or to understand what the context of porn is, why it is so demeaning towards women, which the majority of it is. I would say there's like a statistic that 70 or 80% of porn involves some kind of abuse to the woman. So whether that be verbal words or physical choking or something like that. And then the other piece of it too is that because young people are in such a digital world, communicating even with their friends, mostly through social media and online, and spending less and less time in person, they're having less and less touch. And so that touch is a natural sort of first step that we have towards making deeper connections with someone and navigating or building arousal and attraction that would lead to sex. And so they're missing these fundamental steps in between noticing you're attracted and feeling arousal and entering into sex. So that means that either they're spending a lot more time as someone who's not had sex, which some people would describe as being a virgin. And they're also, when they are arriving into a sexual situation, feeling overwhelmed and lacking the ability to recognize and attune what's happening in the other person's body, which is also creating a lot more non-consensual situations.
How would sex therapy, somatic sex therapy, be able to assist improving intimacy problems, especially with those who may have sensory regulation issues and are averse to physical touch? And I'm very keen on looking at it from the perspective of neurodiversity. And I assume from my understanding, there were a number of neurodiverse people on Virgin Island that I could see were finding it very difficult, to receive touch, maybe to give touch. And in general, the sensory overload looks, difficult for them.
Essentially, somatic sexology, because it's client-centered, we go at the client's pace. And we do things the way that the client is able to learn. Because somatic sexology is trauma-informed, we are equipping the client to navigate experiences of overwhelm and to stay online with what's happening in their body and to start to untangle the different sensory phenomena that's creating that experience of overwhelm. When we can identify the different things that are happening for them, they can actually fully feel their experience. When we are in overwhelm, we're kind of pushing an experience away. We're in panic, we're in response, but we haven't received what's happening. I would also say that because some of the issues that people with neurodiversity have, some of the way that they experience things can not be understood by other people, there aren't many places for them to go and address it and start to have small experience of, say, touch in order to investigate what is going on for me that I don't like this. If someone has an aversion to touch, which I worked with someone just a couple of weeks ago who didn't like to touch others and didn't know how they wanted to be touched themselves. And so we did little exercises, first of noticing if I were to touch them, where feels like the first most safe or mild place to receive touch, and what kind of touch is that? Is it a holding touch? Am I just patting and then moving my hand away? And by creating these little experiences based on what felt comfortable for them, they were able to start noticing how their body responds, and they got to a place in just a few days of being able to know and have a repertoire of ways they'd like to be touched, and to discover that they actually enjoy touching others too.
That's actually very interesting. I mean, because I know a lot of the individuals, and I'm talking about, like, you know, when neurodiversity affects people severely, they need one-to-one. They need you to break down everything in details to teach them step by step. And I think your approach is very much in line with that. You know, teaching them everything in little steps and breaking things down into small things that are more tangible. You said something very interesting in one of your social media posts, and I'm going to read your words essentially. The way we behave sexually is a great storyteller of the way we behave in many other areas of our lives. The micro skills of great sex are also the micro skills of living a great life and running a great business.
Yeah.
Enlighten me.
Okay. Well, let's start with the micro skills.
Okay.
If I want to have great sex, I'm going to have to be present in my body to notice what I'm drawn to. Someone could be touching us in the most delicious way, but if our attention isn't on it, we're actually not going to fully receive and register it, and our bodies aren't going to respond. When we start having great sex, we get really close with what feels good, with the experience of pleasure. And that makes what doesn't feel good and what's not pleasurable even like unbearably obvious to us. And so things that we would have put up with in the past, we can no longer put up with. But also, sex is intimate and vulnerable, and our ability to advocate for what we want in that area takes a certain courage and also nervous system regulation. So we said before that shame shuts down the nervous system and it will literally close off our vocal cords. When we've learned how to regulate ourselves in order to come back online in situations that might otherwise be overwhelming, we can speak up for what we need and for what we want. And so when people learn to do that in the bedroom, they no longer feel so overwhelmed or know how to re-regulate themselves in the boardroom. They are more practiced in using their personal power and their agency to stand up and ask for what they want. Have you ever been in a meeting and felt this like, oh, this isn't going the right way? And so there's this, you come up with this question of, do I say it in front of all of these people, not knowing if everyone else agrees with me? Or do I keep my mouth shut to look good to everyone else, even if we're all going in the wrong direction? And for me, when I really started doing my work in this area, I was working for a business and they weren't paying me what I wanted to be paid. And I don't think they really valued my massive contribution. And after I came back from this trip, where I discovered somatic sexology and all of these things and continue to practice it, I exactly went and did that. I went and asked for my pay rise. And I knew the only reason I could do this was because I was more trusting that what I wanted mattered, and that whether I was going to get it or not was less important than actually asking for it and saying it. We're also worried about losing out on things like, how is my partner going to feel if I ask them to have sex differently? Are they going to be wounded and self-conscious and all of these things? But how is it for you to be there receiving sex that you don't enjoy, to flinch away a little bit when your partner initiates because you know you're not going to enjoy it? Like, that's actually ultimately not good for the relationship. So I think when we all advocate for our wants and needs, when we learn to say yes and no and feel into our willingness in all areas of our lives, it's very powerful. I really do believe that when we learn to have better sex, it just goes everywhere.
Well, Aisha, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you
nice.
so much. It was really lovely to have you. If people wanted to find you, would you like to share your social media pages so they can maybe reach out if they have any questions?
Absolutely. The best thing they can do is actually go to my website, which is my name, AishaParis-Smith.com. And there they can find links to my YouTube, my social media, which is all also just my name.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for everything.
It was
and
a great
hopefully we'll have you
conversation.
again. Same
Thank you.
here. Take care.